Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this conference and for giving me the opportunity to present our views regarding the revision of the Renewable Energy Directive. I have a presentation. I don't know if it's ready to... Okay, great. Sorry, I'm not able to speak Portuguese, so I will do the presentation in English. I hope you can follow the main aspects. Next one, please. After a short informative point about the association I represent, I will present the most important elements of the revision of the directive for the biofuels industry. Next, please. APPA Biocarburantes is the Spanish Biofuels Association. It was founded in 2005 in order to promote the consumption and production of biofuels in Spain and also in the EU. It gathers biodiesel or FAME, bioethanol, and also HBO producers. Next one. I would like to start with a couple of points or items from the proposed revision of the directive that we agree with. Firstly, the increase of the share of energy from renewable sources in the union's gross final consumption of energy from 32% to 40%. And secondly, the increase of the share of advanced biofuels and biogas from Part A of Annex 9 of the directive from 1.75 to 2.2. Through the presentation, I would like to provide you with some little information about the transposition of the RED II in Spain, which has been done only partially. So, for instance, regarding the advanced biofuels, we have a target for this year, mandatory target of 0.2 with double counting. With regards to the transport sector, while the current target is based on energy content, and it's set as a renewable energy in transport share of 14% in 2030, the new proposed target is based on greenhouse gas emissions intensity reduction with a value of 13% for 2030. In our opinion, the current type of target should be kept, or at least the possibility for member states to use it should be maintained. As you might be aware, currently the target is an energy-based target, but member states can choose to set greenhouse gas emissions saving targets to get the same figure at the end of the decade. We also support the increase of the greenhouse gas target up to the 20% proposed by the ITRE rapporteur of the European Parliament. So here we are a little bit more ambitious than EBB. We have made an estimation of the greenhouse gas emission savings for 2030 based on the Spanish plan for energy and climate, and we will get at least 17%. So we consider that the 13% is very, very low. We consider that it is essential that the targets of renewable in transport are truly real and not merely accountable. Therefore, we fully support the expansion of the denominator to include all types of fuels and in all types of transport modes, and the removal of multipliers for biofuels for Annex 9 and for renewable electricity supplied to electric vehicles and trains. In consistency, we consider that also the multiplier for certain types of fuels used in the maritime and in aviation should also be removed. As an example, if we consider the calculation methodology of the RED I that was in place until 2020, and bearing in mind that it's a little bit different to the RED II, in Spain we got a share of renewable energies in in transport in 2020 of 9.5. But if we don't take into account any of the multipliers and we add to the denominator all type of fuels in transport, we would get 5.9, which is almost 40% less. So real targets, it's a very important issue. The proposal maintains the limits for biofuels from food and feed crops. This is the market share of 2020 with the possibility of increasing it by 1 percentage point with a maximum of 7%. And it also maintains the limit for those biofuels with high indirect land use change, so-called ILUC risk, which is basically palm, with a limit of the market share in 2019 and a gradually decrease to 0 in 2030. We considered that once the high ILUC risk raw materials have been identified and they will be phased out from 2024 till 2030, we considered that the generic limit on food and feed crops makes no sense. So what we support is that it should be increased to at least 7% in every member state. Additionally, in a draft regulation presented in November last year, the Commission proposes that only deforestation-free raw materials and products can be marketed in the EU or exported from the EU. This proposal includes all uses of raw materials, and initially it includes palm and soy, as well as the products which are produced from them. So, in our opinion, when this regulation is approved, the ILUC caused by the EU will disappear, and all these limits will no longer have any justification. If we bear in mind that indirect effects of biofuels are caused by direct effects of other sectors that use the same raw materials. The revision also maintains the 1.7% limit for biofuels from raw materials in Part B of Annex 9, which are used cooking oil and animal fats category 1 and 2. We considered that this limit should be totally removed, as there is not solid justification for it. The risk of fraud cannot be the reason to keep this limit, because the risk of fraud affects these raw materials and also any other waste or residue which is used, even those in the Part A of Annex 9. In any case, fraud should be addressed, and additional measures should be established to avoid it or at least minimize it for all the raw materials. One example would be the implementation of the union database that is already foreseen in the current directive. In any case, if the limit is maintained, we consider that the possibility that member states can request the Commission to exceed this limit should be reestablished. Another input about the RED transposition in Spain, the 1.7% cap is already included in our legislation since last year. As I've mentioned, we support the development of the union database to improve the traceability of renewable fuels and also recycled carbon fuels. But we consider that the possibility that member states can create their own national databases where economic operators can introduce the data, and this database, national databases linked to the EU one, should be kept, as this is something that the proposal is removing from the directive. A matter of high concern for us is the lack of consistency between the RED II and other proposed regulations within the same Fit for 55 package, as Paulo Santos just addressed in the previous presentation. So we think that all biofuels should comply with the same sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions criteria and rules, which are currently established in the RED II, including those biofuels which are going to be incentivized with the approval of the regulations on maritime transport and on aviation. And also the same biofuels should be eligible to meet the targets established in the directive and in those two regulations. From our point of view, it makes no sense that a certain biofuel is okay for road transport, but it's not valid for aviation. And it makes no sense that the greenhouse gas emissions calculations for a biofuel depends on which transport is going to use that fuel. We also considered that the proposed modifications to the calculation methodology for the greenhouse gas emissions of biofuels should be rejected, and the 3 points which are mentioned in the presentation should be maintained. Firstly, the possibility of using typical greenhouse gas regional values for the cultivation emissions, the accounting for emission savings due to the capture and substitution of CO2, and the consideration that all residues which are not included in Annex 9 have 0 greenhouse gas emissions up to the point of collection. I think it's important to mention here that these possibilities which are removed in the proposal, according to the Commission, these modifications are a consequence of the changing of the type of target from energy-based target to greenhouse gas emissions target. So we consider this is an additional argument to keep the possibility of using energy-based targets so that these possibilities regarding the greenhouse gas calculations can be kept in the directive. With regards to the calculation methodology for renewable electricity, we consider that it should be the same as for renewable fuels. For renewable fuels, we have firstly, we consider the greenhouse gas emissions of all renewable fuels, no matter if they are higher or lower. They are included in the calculation. But in this case, the greenhouse gas emissions of renewable electricity is considered as 0. All the life cycle assessment studies prove that renewable electricity has emissions, even though if they are lower. So this should be considered. The second point is regarding with what fuel you compare the renewable fuel, or in this case, the renewable electricity. If an electric vehicle does not consume a unit of energy, for instance, a megajoule of renewable electricity, it will not necessarily consume 1 megajoule of fossil fuel-derived electricity. But a megajoule produced with a mix of non-renewable energy sources of electricity, including also nuclear energy, which has very low greenhouse gas emissions. So we consider that the fossil fuel comparator included in the proposal, which is 183 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule, should be replaced by the greenhouse gas emissions of the intensity from the non-renewable electricity mix. For instance, in Spain, the last data that we have is for 2020, and it's 92 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule, which is almost half of the proposed number by the Commission. We also reject the proposal to allow economic operators that supply renewable electricity to electric vehicles in public charging stations to receive and sell credits for greenhouse gas emissions that can be used by obligated parties to meet the transport targets. We considered that this would seriously undermine the current biofuels obligation and the urgent need to substitute fossil fuels with biofuels and also other renewable fuels. The directive that proposed modifications on the RED II also proposed some amendments of the Fuels Quality Directive. In this regard, we support the increase from the maximum limit of FAME in diesel fuel from 7% volume, B7, to 10% volume, B10, and keeping B7 as a protection grade. However, we consider that this requirement of keeping a protection grade should be accompanied with additional measures. Firstly, the obligation to progressively commercialize B10 and E10. Otherwise, we will find ourselves in 10 years as the current situation in Spain. In the case of petrol, E10 is allowed to be commercialized in Spain since 2010, and the protection grade restriction was removed in 2019. However, today, the consumption of E10 is barely zero. So, if there are no additional measures to promote the commercialization of these little bit higher blends, we consider that the operators will keep to the protection grades, so B7 and E5. And the second measure is the allowance for member states to place on the market diesel blends above 10% of FAME, which is currently in the directive, but it's proposed to be removed, and the introduction of the possibility of putting in the market petrol blends above 10% of ethanol. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.